Hi, I'm Dr. Amber Kinser. I'm the department head for the Department of Communication Performance, and I'm also a professor in communication studies. And I'm going to talk with you today about some basics of literature reviews. And then I'm going to talk about some tips for how to make your lit reviews great. So the first thing is to take a look at what it is that a lit review is about. What's the point of a lit review? The first point of the lit review is to enter into a conversation. You are entering into a scholarly conversation. You're being a participant in a conversation with other scholars. And so the first point of the lit review is to establish you as a participant in it. And then the second point of the interview is to identify you as your role in that conversation. So I'm going to talk about each of these two briefly. First, you're entering into the scholarly conversation. You're going to be a participant in that. What you're going to be doing is trying to situate your work and to show where it fits. So as a scholar, as an academic writer, you have a responsibility to show how your work fits in with the work of other scholars. So you will take a look at the literature that's already been published, the work that's already been done on your topic or on the subject area that kind of surrounds your topic, and you're sort of laying out what's been done there. So you're articulating what is already known. What is it that we know already about this topic? Now, sometimes you're exploring something that's very new. And so you're not able to find much literature on it. In that case, what you would do is find literature that's related to it that helps to set the stage for the work that you want to do, the research that you're going to be conducting. So you articulate what it is that researchers have already said about the topic, and then so that we have some context for understanding what you're adding to it. You have a responsibility as an academic writer to add to the larger body of knowledge. And so a lit review helps show what additions your work is going to make. So you're going to articulate what it is that's already known. And then you're going to establish yourself as a credible participant in that conversation by saying, I am aware of what's been done. I am well read about my topic. I'm not just coming in and assuming that I am the first person who's ever done anything on anything like this. I am informed by the scholars who have gone before me, even if they haven't looked at the specific topic. I am informed by the related work that's been done before I got here, and that gives your reader a sense of what contribution your research is going to make. So the first point of the lit review is to allow you to enter into a scholarly conversation. The second point of the lit review is to identify your role in that conversation. So the first step of identifying your role in the conversation is to identify. So you've already laid out what has been done, right? In under number 1 that we just talked about. And so now what you're doing is identifying what's not been done. What is not known? What is the gap in the literature that you think needs to be filled, that your work is going to attempt to fill? Now you have one research project, maybe. It's probably not going to fill in that entire gap, but it's going to contribute to filling in the gap that's in the literature. Some topic that hasn't been explored before, or some topic that has been explored before but hasn't been explored in the way that you're exploring it, or hasn't been explored by way of the questions you're asking it, or hasn't been explored by way of the method that you're using. So sometimes the topic has been explored, and sometimes even the question has been explored by people before you, but not in the way that you've explored it. So you are identifying a gap in the literature and identifying, here's what we don't know yet, though. Here's what we haven't explored, or here's how we haven't explored it yet. And then you write a rationale that explains why that matters. So we could always find something that hasn't been done, but that won't be enough if you can't argue that it's important that we know this thing. So you're establishing an important space for the work that you want to do by saying there is this gap. It's really important that we have this knowledge, that we're able to fill this gap. Knowing this thing in our discipline is going to further the discipline in these ways. And then the last, so you are, by doing that, by talking about why the discipline needs to know it, why the gap needs to be filled, you're answering the so what question. A lot of times when I read student work, graduate student work, they haven't addressed the so what question. So there's a gap, and you think it's interesting. Why should I read it? Why should I care? Why is this important? So make sure that you are, when you're identifying the gap, you're also talking about why filling that gap matters, why your reader should care about the research that they're getting ready to read, that it's going to make a significant contribution, that not knowing this thing is creating an impoverished view of the topic or something like that. And then at the end of that, you articulate a research question that'll guide your effort to fill in that gap. So you've talked about what is known. You've established yourself as a credible participant in the conversation on your topic, in the scholarly conversation, by saying, I'm well read on this topic in the discipline and in surrounding disciplines. And then you identify the gap in the literature, the place that needs your work, and then you explain why it is that that gap needs to be filled, what filling in that gap will do to further the discipline or to make more humane our understanding of this aspect of human experience. And then you will identify then, so here's what I'm going to then look at. Here's the material. Here's the gap. Here's why filling the gap is important. Here's the research question I'm going to use to guide my effort to fill in that gap. So that's sort of the foundational explanation for what a lit review is supposed to accomplish. Now I'm going to give you some tips about how to write those so that your lit review prepares your reader for the study that they're going to, or the findings that you're going to report, the story you're going to tell, or other people's stories that you're going to explore. So I'm looking at the craft of a literature review. I think it's important for you to consider the literature review as a kind of craft, as a kind of thing that needs to be sculpted and molded and shaped in a particular way so that it best sets up your study, so that it brings your readers along in a logical, easily flowing, compelling way. So I'm going to give you 10 tips for writing great reviews. And I do these in these sort of one-word ideas. So the first one is job. And what I mean by that is when you've written your first draft of your literature review, you go back over each paragraph and you maybe write in the margin of that paragraph, what is the job of this paragraph? I have a research question, I have a goal I'm trying to pursue, or I have a thesis, a main argument that I'm trying to unfold in my lit review. What is the job of this paragraph in unfolding that argument? Then you go to the next paragraph. What is the job of this paragraph in unfolding that argument? I say that because a lot of times when I'm reading lit reviews, the students have a paragraph in there that allows them to kind of talk about an idea, but it's really not helping them unfold the specific argument that they're going for. So it's a kind of an extraneous paragraph, or it should be part of the paragraph above or the paragraph below. So the first thing to keep in mind is that every paragraph should have a specific job, and you should be able to identify what that job is in unfolding your argument. Each paragraph should be critical. The second one is match. As you write the paragraphs, your paragraphs are going to consist of claims and support. What is it that you're saying? What is it that you're arguing? And what evidence are you providing from the literature? And then later, what evidence are you providing from your data to support that claim? So one of the things you have to do is make sure that your claim and your evidence match, and that you're not claiming anything that you don't have evidence for. So if you're saying the people that you were talking to, let's see, were afraid of a particular outcome, and then you give an example that doesn't really demonstrate fear, then that's an example where your claim and your evidence don't match. So you need to find another example that does demonstrate being afraid, or you need to change your claim so that it says, more accurately forecasts the evidence that you're getting ready to bring. So in your lit review, you're making sure that your claims and your evidence match, shifting the claim so that it matches the excerpt, the quote, or the argument from the author that you're citing, or tweaking what it is that you're providing as evidence so that it matches the claim that you're making in the paragraph. So everything has a job, your claims and your evidence match, and you write with precision. One of the things that I write most often on student literature reviews is the word precision. It's important that you say exactly what you mean. So a lot of times I'll circle it and I write the word precision, and I mean, I think this maybe isn't exactly the word you're looking for. Sometimes you might spend an hour trying to find the exact right word because a different word changes the meaning of your sentence, and so whether or not you have the exact right word is really very important. So as the examples that I give here are, there's a difference between less, which means lower, and less of something, or fewer, which means fewer things, or less in amount, and those are not the same kinds of ideas. If you mean that this was an important change or a significant change, you won't say it's a big change. Say that you're making an argument about some kind of change, because you're making because that ends up being about import and magnitude and impact, and not actual physical size. So make sure you're attending to issues of precision. The next one is the lit review is really not a place for I think and I believe, because you're reviewing the literature that's been published in the discipline, and what you're doing is setting it up so that you can say, here is what has been done. Here are the arguments that have been made. Here are the problems with some of those arguments. Here is the gap that some of those arguments leave. And here's something that we need to explore, and here's why. So there's not really room in there for, I believe this is important. You're doing a research project not just because you believe it's important, but because you can establish its import grounded in the disciplinary literature. So it needs to be more literature or evidence-based than something that you're thinking or feeling. Now, you may be attracted to a particular topic because you think it's important and you believe that it's important and you feel it's important. But when you write a research project, it has to be grounded in something it has to be grounded in something other than sort of your feeling about it. So as I say, you're not writing an opinion piece. A literature review is not an opinion piece. So I think and I believe don't belong in there. Make the argument strong enough that it can stand with the evidence you provided. Okay, so the next one is pith. Be very selective about the quotes that you choose. When you're quoting an author, you want to make sure that you are picking the most pithy parts of the quote. Sometimes students will use long excerpts or use a sentence that really they could have summarized on their own. So you choose an excerpt or parts of an excerpt based on the idea that it's said in a particularly pithy way, or an articulate manner, or in a engaging and compelling turn of phrase. So make sure that you are being selective about what it is that you're quoting, or that you are otherwise summarizing the more mundane aspects of it. Plunk is something that is a word I use to talk about when you just plunk an idea down there, just sort of throw it down there on the paper and you don't do anything with it. A lot of times that happens when you quote some of the literature. I was just reading some graduate student work very recently, and there's sort of some talking and then a quote and then some more talking, and then I write in the margin plunk and run. What that means is you're plunking this down and then running, instead of setting up the excerpt, then doing putting the excerpt, and then explaining how that relates to the work. So you can't just sort of throw down. You don't want to just throw down excerpts. You want to create a space for them, and then share the excerpt, and then explain what that means and how that relates to the argument that you're making. A quote is a lump of clay. It needs to be crafted and sculpted into the paragraph in order for it to work. You can't just throw it down and leave it there. Number 7, what you're looking for in the literature review is themes. So you're reading all this literature, you got 20, 40 articles out on your desk. You're not talking about them author by author. You're looking at all of them and identifying what are the primary themes that I'm seeing. What you're saying to your audience is, look, I've looked at all this literature. I'm a credible source. I know what the literature says. Let me kind of encapsulate it for you. Essentially, this literature is saying these 3 things or these 5 things. And then you talk about each of those. So you would unfold your argument theme by theme and not author by author. So you wouldn't, for example, take the article and then say this person, author A says, talks about idea 1 and idea 2, and then the next paragraph is author B's paragraph, and they do idea 3, and then the next paragraph is author C's paragraph, and they talk about 2, and then 1, and then idea number 4. So that's not the way to do it. That's what I call abstract stacks. You know what an abstract is, a brief summary of an article. And a lot of times, first lit reviews from graduate students are set up article by article, and they just sort of stack abstracts on top of each other. Here's a summary of this article, here's a summary of this article. That's not a lit review. That's a stacking of abstracts. So instead, you'll find out what are the main themes, what are the main ideas that are surfacing from the literature, from all these articles and book chapters that you have on your desk. And then you break that down, and then you plug in the authors as they fit under each of those ideas. So idea 1, here are the authors who talked about that. Idea 2, here are the authors that talked about that. So you set that up you set your lit review up not in terms of, not author by author, but theme by theme, and you avoid those abstract stacks. Number 8 is referring to the researchers. So you don't talk about the article. I didn't say the word the article or their article. You talk about the people who have made those arguments. The article didn't really make the argument. The authors made the argument. And you want to make sure that the scholars get their due. So you will, instead of saying, so you would say Kinser argues that, instead of naming one of my books and say Performing Motherhood, which is the name of one of my book, argues that. So it's the author who's making the argument, not the text. Refer to the researchers rather than to the research itself. And then number 9 is repetition, lots of repetition. If you don't do abstract stacks, then you won't be repeating your ideas. A lot of times the repetition of ideas comes out of stacking up abstracts. But if you've identified what the primary themes of your lit review are, then you'll be able to reduce that repetition. Sometimes the same terminology, sometimes you use a really pithy phrase, but then you use it again 2 pages later. What you need to do is find a synonym for that second use, and if you want to use that pithy phrase again, you put it many pages after that. So you don't want a good pithy phrase to lose its force because you've said it too many times. So make sure you're not repeating the argument. If you hear yourself saying as mentioned previously, a lot of times that means you don't need to be saying it again. Every once in a while, you'll refer to something you've already said, but most of the time, there shouldn't be any need for you to say, as I've mentioned previously, because when you mentioned it previously is when you should have handled it thoroughly. So avoid repetition. And then the last one is craft. Don't just write a lit review. Don't just write. Create. So maybe you write up your first draft, but then you work on sculpting and molding and identifying, do these arguments flow into each other? Can you tell what my main ideas are? Have I made that clear? Is each quote set up? Did I forecast and prepare the reader for a quote? Did I then explain it? Does each paragraph have a job? Does it make sure that this job happens before this job happens, or should I switch them? So you are working to make that lit review really unfold a compelling narrative about the state of the research and your role and your research's role in it. So you are, so that's sort of the larger lit review, but also sentence by sentence or idea by idea. Sometimes people will plunk an idea down, not just a quote, plunk an idea down and move away from it. But a lot of times I'll say you need to linger here. This is a good idea. You dropped it and then ran, and it really needs to be massaged a little bit more. You really need to work through it. So as you're writing your lit reviews, keep these tips in mind. Understand what the purpose of a lit review is, and happy writing of great lit reviews.